Okay, well folks, today we are very fortunate to be getting to spend some time with well-known hemp oil advocate and author Rick Simpson. Now, if you haven't already heard of this man, I'd be very surprised. In fact, I don't think you could even have a conversation about the legalisation and medicinal use of cannabis oil without Rick Simpson's name coming up. He's basically the guy who started it all, and his documentary video, Run From The Cure, has become a worldwide phenomenon. And I guess if you haven't seen or watched that video then we would strongly recommend that you take the time to have a look at it. It really is quite remarkable, and I guess it's a real eye-opener as to what's going on as far as cancer treatments and cures are concerned. So Rick, I'd like to start by saying good morning and welcome to life-saving-naturalcures and naturalremedies.com.
Well, I'm very happy to be with you, brother.
Yeah, and look, we know you're very busy at the moment, so we appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today and answer our questions. Now, to begin with, Rick, I want to start with your websites, because you've got two terrific websites. You've got your phoenixtears.ca, which is your main website, and that basically is everything that you need to know about your cannabis oil protocol, how to make the oil safely, increasing the potency, all that sort of thing. So, and basically, anyone who is looking to use cannabis oil I would recommend that they start there to begin with. But what I'd actually like to talk to you about is your Phoenix Tears Foundation, because I guess it gets a little bit less exposure, but it was created a couple of years ago. So can you tell our viewers what the Phoenix Tears Foundation is actually about, and what was the actual reason behind launching it?
Well, quite a few years ago, a lady from Colorado named Janet Sweeney, she contacted me, and she was very interested, in the oil, and she started the Phoenix Tears Foundation, and but Janet and I work very closely together, and she's done some wonderful work in Colorado. As a matter of fact, I think she's probably the main reason that the use of this oil is now legal in that state. She's quite an activist, a wonderful woman, and she's healing people with the oil, and she's done just a magnificent job. So, anybody that would like to support the foundation, by all means, please do. We're not in this for the money. We just want people to know, how to heal, and it's more about an education program than anything else. Like we do help people when we can. I can't because I'm on the road right now. I'm in Croatia, but but just providing the information and providing the support, to people that are suffering. I think it's so important, and Janet has just done a magnificent job.
Yeah, I've actually spoken to Janet. She's a very nice lady, and but no, that's good, because if you go onto your Facebook page, the official Rick Simpson Facebook page, Janet's always got plenty to say on that. Which is good, and she keeps us all up to date. So I love it. I go in there every day to see what she's up to, and that sort of thing. What I'd also like to say, Rick, very honestly, look, you are my number one hero. You really are, and I know I'm not the only person. There's a lot of other people out there that think the same way, and I'll tell you why. Because there's not many people left in the world that would basically put everything on the line, I guess risk persecution and even jail time by standing up to the powers that be about something they believe so strongly in. But you've done this and you continue to do this. But I have to ask you, with all you've been through, is there ever a time when you regret it at all? Has there ever been a time when you thought maybe, why the hell am I doing this?
No, how can you regret helping people and saving lives? Back in 2003, when basically, I was using the oil for a couple of years before that, but it was 2003 when I really started to see the full medicinal impact, that this substance had. So I went to the Canadian government. They told me from the time I was a child, we want a cure for cancer and we want preventative medicine. So I did it openly. I didn't hide anything from anyone. So I contacted all the different political parties, Canadian Cancer Society, Dr. David Suzuki. We even went to the United Nations about this. Nobody would do a thing. And I was so disgusted with these people. I thought, we have a cure here, a natural, non-addictive, harmless cure, made from nature. But yet they reject it, because in truth, our world is being run by the big money interests. And they control our governments, and in turn, our governments control the political, our legal system, and the medical system. And they've shoved all this nonsense down our throats, Troy. My God, how did they ever convince people that poison is good for them? And when you look at chemotherapy and radiation, that is just utter madness. You imagine a doctor that works in an oncology unit. That deals with children. When they get up in the morning and they look at themselves in the mirror, how can they live with themselves knowing that they're going to go in and take small children and poison them? This world really doesn't make any sense anymore. And I always get a laugh out of people. A lot of people will come up and say, well, I can't take this oil because it's against my religion. And I said, well, do you believe in Jesus Christ? I'm not a religious person myself, but I like to throw this at them. And they'll always say, well, of course. And I said, well, why would you not use the same medicine that Jesus used? And then they get the stupid look on their face. And I said, just look into the holy anointing oil. Look what it contains. They found the recipes and everything. And, they're basically all they're doing, they're taking, I forget, there's 3 or 4 different things they put in it. But the main thing was olive oil. They heat the olive oil up, drop what's called canna blossom. They drop the buds into the olive oil, which extracts the resins off the bud. So the oil is full of cannabinoids. It wasn't the power of God that Jesus was using to heal people. It was the power of hemp. It's an amazing plant, and the history goes back so far. We've used this, the earliest writings go back to 2800 BC in China. But I think we've used cannabis medicines for thousands of years before then. Because in those days, we didn't have our hospitals and trauma centers. They relied on nature to do the healing for them. So, and even back, 700 years before Christ, the ancient Persian religious text called the Vigdad, they listed the most medicinal plants known to man. The number 1 plant on that list, cannabis hemp. And that was 700 years before Jesus. Now here we are, 2,000 years after Jesus has passed on, and we're still not using it. This is insanity.
It's almost like we're going backwards, not forwards, isn't it?
That's exactly right, brother.
Yeah, no, but I agree. It's crazy. And it's funny when you talk about, the kids and giving them chemotherapy. It's like, I just agree. How can they do that to those kids? Yeah.
Well, you see, Troy, many people have a hard time, wrapping their heads around this subject because, I was the same way before I stumbled into this obvious truth. I always thought there could be no such thing as a cure-all. No medicine could work on cancer and chronic pain and diabetes and glaucoma, multiple sclerosis, and just on and on and on. And I treated about 5,000 people directly when I was in Canada. And it was just a miracle to watch, one person after another with all these different ailments. And some people would come to me with like 4 or 5 different things. And usually within about 3 months, they're all gone. They're feeling great again. And the simple truth is, Troy, as we age, the time you get to be 50 years old, you really don't have much to look forward to. You know, pain, suffering, diabetes, and cancer, you name it.
Yeah.
So if we can, if we can eliminate the pain and suffering, then why aren't we? And, and this oil definitely extends life. It could give us a much longer lifespan. And, eventually we all die, of course. But I don't think it's the dying that bothers people so much. It's more about the suffering that leads up to the dying that we're afraid of.
Yeah.
So if we can eliminate that, then why shouldn't we?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. What I was going to say before was, there's no doubt that advocating the use of cannabis oil to treat cancer in adults is, it's still very controversial. But we're talking about kids, and I guess what's even worse than when you advocate cannabinoids for adults is when you recommend them for children, because that stirs up a hornet's nest, doesn't it? And I'd just like to ask you, what do you think that is? Is it because cannabis still seems to have this, I don't know, like the stigma attached to it of being a recreational drug? So, by giving it to our kids, we must be, creating druggies or,
No, I mean, they go on about the gateway effect. If you smoke cannabis, next week you'll be on heroin or their pharmaceuticals. And that's a bunch of nonsense, for God's sakes. I've known people that have smoked cannabis for over 40 years, and they've never gone on to harder drugs. But, even the smoking aspect, this is what I tell people. I said, look, I don't look at cannabis as being a drug at all. I look at this plant as being a medicine that can also be used recreationally. Now, it's been proven now that people that just smoke cannabis, on average, live longer than those who don't. So even smoking it really is a form of preventative medicine. But, I've always said if you smoke cannabis, like 90% of the medicinal aspect just goes up in smoke. But if you start ingesting the raw, unburned cannabinoids right into your body, that's when the magic happens. And, the healing power of this substance is just phenomenal. Third-degree burns heal in no time with no scars. So many things that the medical system, cannot do anything with. Like even a simple thing like a diabetic ulcer. Medical system can't heal a diabetic ulcer. A little bit of this oil. And, this is what I always tell people, too, when I'm doing these interviews. I said, look, you don't have to believe a word I'm saying. Simply go out, get 1 ounce of good cannabis bud, follow our instructions, and produce the oil. And one ounce should give you 3 to 4 grams of this high-quality oil. And then simply go out and find somebody, well, in Australia, there's no shortage of skin cancer. Find somebody with skin cancer, put a little bit of oil on the cancer, put a bandage on, change it every 3 days, add fresh oil, and watch what happens. Anybody can prove it to themselves. But the medicine is so simple to make. See, this is what defeats them, because anyone can make this medicine. In truth, if you put a blindfold on me, and if you put the material in front of me, I could make this medicine blindfolded. So it's the ultimate answer, and it's just the simplicity of this medication that's going to defeat this horrible system that we're living under.
Yeah, actually, you're talking about like making the cannabis oil, because there's a very specific way to make it so you get the most out of it. And once again, we would suggest to anyone who's thinking about it to get on the Phoenix Tears website, Phoenix Tears CA, because there's everything there that you need to know and about it. And we can't stress that enough, because it's important that people get the right information straight away. But I'd like to ask you as well, Rick, when people don't get the results from the cannabis oil, is it usually because they didn't make it right? I know when you help someone, you make sure that they have a batch that's been personally made up by yourself, don't you?
Yes. It's very important. The problem is today, there are many people on this planet who are producing good oil, and they're helping vast numbers of people. But there's also a great number that in the past they were drug dealers, and they grew cannabis or they dealt different drugs. And drug dealers do not like to take the bud And, basically, when you make the medicine, the bud is no more good because you're taking, the resins, the part that gets you high, the part that heals you, you're taking it off the bud material. So what they do, many drug dealers, they'll go out and they'll sell their bud, and then they take the clippings and the leaves, and then they make these low-quality oils. And unfortunately, where my name has become so well known, they all say, we're supplying the Rick Simpson oil.
Yeah.
And then people order this trash, and they get it, and then they contact me, and then they report that, well, I bought your oil, but it doesn't have the same effects you described. And then I have the unpleasant task of telling them that they've been robbed. And I find that very, very upsetting. And I wish I could say it's only happened once or twice, but every time I turn around, I'm getting, people coming to me, showing me oils, or coming at me over the internet. And as a matter of fact, here just shortly after I landed back in Zagreb, some patients came to visit me in the apartment I was staying in, and they had bought 4 bottles of oil. And I always supplied the oil in syringes because it's much easier out your doses, and it's much neater. But they had these 4 bottles, and when I took the top off, it had an eyedropper in it. And the oil was runny. And my oil is really not an oil, it's a thick grease.
Yeah.
And so I looked at these people and I said, where did you get this oil? They said, well, we got it from you. And I said, dear, I'm very sorry, but you did not purchase this from me because I never shipped oil out of Canada to begin with. And this is not my oil. So they went right over, they had a computer with them, and they showed me the emails. And now here was this guy pretending to be me. And, and he gave them this big spiel, and then he signed the email, R. Simpson. He charged them $4,300. For this trash. And this goes on all the time, and people are getting ripped off. So, that's the reason I've always told people, in reality, at present, in most cases, it's best to produce your own. I like to see people grow the plant and then make their own medicine, and then they know what they have. But, like a lot of people, with the laws and everything, they're afraid to grow it. Nobody wants to go to jail. But in reality, anybody that puts somebody in jail over cannabis, they're the ones that should be going to jail, not the cannabis growers. I think farming is the most honorable profession on this planet, and to me, cannabis is just a part of farming.
Yeah, actually, it's funny you're saying that about the guy who was pretending to be you, because there were two on your Rick Simpson Facebook page that Janet was talking about last week. Maybe one of those guys was one of them, but she was saying that, beware of these guys. There's another one out there doing the same thing, which is very unfortunate for you. So, but yeah.
Well, Troy, it's the difference between life and death. If you provide a lower quality oil, now, it might help some people. I won't deny that. But if you have somebody that's dying from terminal cancer, you can't afford to play games.
Yeah.
You have to give them the very best, and that's when the magic happens. And, most of the oils that I produced were basically, you might as well say about 100% pure cannabinoids because they've been tested. And actually, there was a gentleman in the U.S. that just here a few months ago, he produced the oil with a pound of OJ Kush. And he sent me the test results. It was 95.58% THC. I think it was 2.9% CBN and 2.1% CBD. So when you add that up, basically you're talking about 100%. And, this is the oils that really gave this medication its reputation. Today, there's many people talking about the importance of CBD. And, I think all cannabinoids are important. As a matter of fact, one of my favorite sayings is that I've never met a cannabinoid that I didn't like. But the simple truth is we don't even know how many cannabinoids there really is in that plant. A friend of mine, Dr. Lemire Hanoush, he works with Dr. Michelin at Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Now, these are the top guys in the world. in this profession. And Dr. Hanush, he discovered anandamides the natural cannabinoids back in the 1980s. So he's very well known. But, these people, I know when I sent my oil to Lemire, he couldn't believe it. He said, my God, he said, I've never seen oil like this. It's so powerful. But, these are the people that know, the facts on the subject. And I don't want to tell people that CBDs are not important. They are very important. But I think there's too much emphasis being put. They're saying, well, if we make CBD oil, it won't get you high. Well, to me, getting high is part of the healing process. It's the high that makes you sleep. It's the high that kills your pain. So I think it's ridiculous to try to take the high out of this medicine. And when people start using it, in the beginning, we all have different tolerances. Some people have no problems at all. But other people with a low tolerance, or someone that has never used cannabis before, or any of the oil, a lot of people have the tendency to look at this substance and think, well, it's just an oil. And they think about the size, they are. I had a couple come to me one time in Canada. And the husband, he was a 300-pound man, great big man. And his wife, I swear to God, she didn't weigh 80 pounds, little tiny woman. So they had he had some problems. Oh, they both had some problems. So I provided the oil. And it was about 5 hours later, the lady, she called me on the phone and she was really panicked. She said, my husband's laying on his back on the Chesterfield and he can't get up. And of course I started laughing. She said, this is serious. And I said, no, it's not, dear. He's high. And I said, I would be willing to bet that he took more oil than I told him to, didn't he? And she said, well, yes, he did. She said, but, he weighs 300 pounds. And I said, size has nothing to do with it. And when I said it, she started laughing and she said, my God, you're right. She said, I took a dose and I don't feel a thing, but he can't get up. But the effects, wear off, because I step people up very gradually. The first 4 days, 3 doses a day, little specks, like a quarter of a drop. And then 4 days later, increase your dose. And usually within about a month or maybe 5 weeks, the patient is up to the point where they can ingest 1/3 of a gram a dose. And at that point, then you're taking in 1 gram or 1 milliliter every 24 hours. And I encourage people to continue taking that dosage, until the full 60 grams is gone. But in some cases, when people came to me, if they were really near death, and believe me, I've dealt with a lot of them. I've had people that I had to carry in my house, because they couldn't walk. So I would carry them in and set them up at the table. And then I would explain to them, I said, under normal circumstances, I tell people to start with small doses. But, if somebody is near death, I basically tell them to get as much of this oil in them as quickly as possible. And the first man that did that, he came over to me. He was a man about 50 years old. He had a 16-year-old son with him, and he right at death's door. And so I looked at him and I said, have you ever smoked cannabis? And he said, well, yes. And I said, well, good. There's no reason to fear this substance. And I said, normally I tell people to start with small doses, but I said, in your case, I think it would be a good idea to go home and start taking, large doses as quickly as possible. So 28 days later, the same man contacts me and he said, I would like to come over and visit with you. So the next day he showed up at the house, he knocked on the door, and when he walked in the door, I didn't recognize him. He'd gained about 20 pounds. He was a picture of health. And I was looking at him and I said, how much oil have you taken? And he said, I took the full 60 grams. And of course it shocked me. And I said, you took 60 grams in 28 days? Well, and then he looked at me and he said, did I do something wrong? And I said, no, you did nothing wrong, brother. You did everything right, but how did you do it? And he said, well, when I went back home, he said, I started taking doses every 6 hours. And he said, every time I took a dose, he said, I took a little bit more. And he said, for the first week and a half, Rick, he said, I couldn't get off the Chesterfield. He said, it just knocked me down. But he said, one morning I woke up, he said, I took my big dose. Nothing happened. And he said, after that, he said, I just flew through the medication.
Yeah.
But normally when people become, in the beginning, I tell people, don't drive your cars until you become, accustomed to the oil's effects, because it doesn't impair your motor skills. But don't drive your car until you're accustomed to the effects, and just simply relax and go with it, because the oil it does no harm. But there are people that will become anxious. Well, what happens is a lot of people that have no experience with cannabis, when they start to get high, they try to fight this, and then they become anxious, they get paranoid. And I always tell people, I said, look, don't try to fight the effects of the oil. Just lay down and go with it. Enjoy the ride, because it's not going to harm you. But thanks to Janet Sweeney, Janet found out here a little while ago about this natural substance that our body actually creates itself, but it's available in health food stores. And it's a substance called citicoline. That's C-I-T-I, I believe C-O-L-I-N-E or E-N-E, I'm not really sure. But a lady in British Columbia that I met, she was a cancer patient, and she was having trouble with the oil. And Janet contacted her and got her on the citicoline, and she said, as soon as I took the oil, when the effects started to bother me, she said, I took a little bit of citicoline, and she said, it just relaxed me, I went to sleep, and now she's cancer-free.
Okay, that's interesting to know. Because I was also going to say there's a lot of companies, or there's one in particular in the US that is selling the cannabis oil, and it doesn't contain THC, so therefore it's legal. What are your thoughts on that one, Rick? I don't know much about it. Does that still work, or are we losing some of the potency there?
Well, they're losing some of the potency, I think. I mean, in certain conditions, this high CBD oil, it could have wonderful benefits. But as I said before, it's a synergetic effect of all these cannabinoids working together. And Dr. Hanush told me himself here about 2 years ago, he looked into the subject again more deeply, and he said, I identified 108 different cannabinoids in that plant. And he said, there's still more. So, the problem is the research, our governments have kept the research so restricted.
Yeah.
But if they would just turn us loose, I mean, we've had wonderful results with this medicine. But if they would just let me go ahead and do what I do best, I know, with the help of these Dr. Hanush and Dr. Paul Hornby in Canada, we could perfect this medicine in no time. And then we would know the exact levels of cannabinoids that are required to treat each individual condition the most effectively. But my main aim in this whole thing is to take the money out of medicine. And I've said this so many times, it's a farm crop. All through history, there was never a problem. Farmers, it was necessary for our survival. So, if we grew this plant properly, just same as if it was corn. I mean, if you have two fields, say 2 100-acre fields, one's planting corn and one planting cannabis, what's a pound of corn worth? Practically nothing. So, in reality, if the governments didn't have these restrictions in place, you could go out and buy a kilo of high-grade cannabis bud for $5 from any farmer, and that's the way it should be.
Yeah, exactly. So
and I should mention, Troy, too, the effect this has on animals. I mean, all animal life, we all have endocannabinoid systems. And I love working with dogs and animals because, they don't give you any stupid arguments. They just take the medicine and they heal.
Yeah.
But it's not unusual for us to heal a dog of terminal cancer in about a week to a week and a half, or 2 weeks at the most. It just, because like a dog's metabolism is much more rapid, than a human's. So they heal much more quickly. You can almost watch them healing. It's just amazing.
Yeah. So, no, it sure is. But what I was going to say as well was, you sort of think back to when you started. You started out you're basically just a one-man band, advocating and giving away your cannabis oil. but now, because you talk quite a lot about Janet Sweeney, you've got some very reputable and hard-working people such as Janet working with you. So, I mean, are you surprised at just how big this has all got? You know, and how it's sort of taken off? I mean, you started off with a video that just went crazy, and it still is. You know, well, you're even getting laws, you know, changed in some countries.
Oh, yes. So, but what surprises me is that it's taken so long. You know, I mean, I've been beating this drum for over 10 years now. But like last year when I was here, I've been in Croatia several times. And actually, Croatia, they even let me on national television here. So we really got the message out.
Okay.
But last year when I was here, there was hardly anyone making oil. My God, this year when I came back to Zagreb, people walked right up to me on the street. And they recognized me. And are you Rick Simpson? And I said, yes. And I'm an oil maker. I would like you to sample my oil. And, right now I'm in Rijeka, but I spent a week in Zagreb. And during that week, I sampled 4 different oils from different suppliers. And it's a pleasure to tell you, brother, that they were all high quality. And these people are now treating people everywhere, and they're having wonderful results. So I'm very pleased with the way it's spreading, but I wish it could have happened, you know, much more quickly, because when I look at, you know, back in 2003, when I contacted the Canadian government, I mean, there's over 70,000 Canadians dying every year of cancer. Now, I'm not saying that I could have saved every one of them, or this oil could have saved every one of them, but believe me, we would have saved a very high percentage. So when I look at the Canadian government, you know, all you have to do is the mathematics, 70,000 times 10 years, that's 700,000 people. So who's responsible for their death? Could it be the Canadian government? You know, I'm very ashamed to even call myself a Canadian now because, you know, I mean, I love my country. That's my homeland. It's a beautiful country, but it is run by criminals, and that has to change, and it has to change now.
I mean, we've got the same problem over here, Rick, in Australia. I mean,
yes.
Like of course, cannabis is highly illegal. I mean, if I get caught with even some seeds on me, then I get summons to court, I get fined, and I can end up with a criminal record. So, of course, yeah, it's the same sort of thing. If I grow it in my yard and someone dobs me in, you know, I'm in big trouble.
Yes.
You know, so it is. It's crazy.
Well, I mean, right in the Bible, you know, under God's law, there's, you know, or even under common law, growing cannabis is not a crime. But I was doing an interview here with Ron Stevens. He's also another. He does a show in Canada. A great guy. And when I was on the show, he brought another gentleman on, and he went by the name of Minister Robin. And so we got talking, and Robin told me, he said, I used to work for the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And I said, oh, did you? And he said, yes. He said, I was in the upper echelon in what they call CSIS. And he said, after a few years, he said, I seen it for what it was. So he said, I left that line of work. And so he started looking into this free man on the land. There's a lot of talk about that these days. But he said it was too convoluted, and he said, I didn't think I could get to where I wanted to go through the free man on the land thing. So he said, I started looking into what laws are based on. And he said, I found that law is supposed to be based on the King James Bible. So he told me, he said, a few years ago, he said, I started growing cannabis. And he said, a few years ago, they came in and they raided me. They took me to court. And before the court got underway, he stood up and he said, I have a question, you know, for the court. And would that be okay? And the judge said, yes. And he looked at the judge and he said, would I be wrong in saying that laws are based on the King James Bible? And the judge looked at him and he said, no, you would not be wrong. And he said, would I be wrong in saying that no law shall supersede God's laws? And I guess the judge almost turned white, and he excused himself from the case. 7 judges excused themselves. They wouldn't take him on because they knew he was going to expose them. These laws that we have in these courts are man-made laws. and they do not supersede God's laws. It's just pen and it's just ink and paper is all it is.
Yeah.
So these judges kept stepping down. 2 prosecutors quit. And finally, they took him out in the back room and they said, look, what do you want? He said, I want you people to leave me alone. Since that time, they have. So these are little things that people should know. I mean, nobody has the right to tell you you can't use that medicine. I mean, if there was a danger or it caused death or any harm, then I could see a law being put in place. But cannabis has never harmed anyone. And these laws that are put in place right now, they're all based in corruption. They're not real laws. Now, last year when I was in Croatia here, I had a meeting with the advisor to the Minister of Health. And she was a female doctor. The minute I walked, we went right to the government buildings. The minute I walked into her office, the first thing she said, it's addictive. And I looked at her and I said, all through history, I said, it's a known fact that cannabis is not addictive. And then she said, well, somebody died from its effects. And she had a computer sitting right on her desk. And I pointed at the computer. I said, show me. And she said, well, they died from a synthetic cannabinoid that the drug companies were manufacturing. And I said, well, that doesn't surprise me. But nobody dies from the cannabinoids from the plant itself. And then I looked at her and I said, you don't even know why you have this law, do you? And she's looking at me. I said, was there ever a study? Did the Croatian government ever do a study on this plant to determine, the horrible effects? No, they never. They simply did what the big money told them to do. Put a law in place and make the whole human race has been suffering forever for no reason at all. And I've said right along, I honestly believe that these big pharmaceutical companies like Eli Lilly, Parker Davis, Squibb, I think these companies have known how to cure cancer for 150 years, but there's no money in curing people.
That's exactly right. There's only money in trying to control them, try to keep them going with their drugs and that sort of thing. So, but what I was going to say was we're talking about when you talk about the evidence on cannabis oil and what it can treat and even cure. It's almost becoming overwhelming. You're talking cancer, Parkinson's, dementia, Alzheimer's, diabetes, depression, and more recently there's epilepsy that's been added to the list. Because what I was going to ask you, Rick, is there any disease or ailment that you've actually come across that failed to respond to your hemp oil protocol?
No, they all respond. We've even treated schizophrenics very successfully with this medication. Because, when you start taking the oil, it decalcifies your pineal gland. And your pineal gland more or less controls your perceptions of reality. And that's what happens with the schizophrenics. Their pineal gland becomes unhealthy and calcified, and then they're schizophrenics. But they take the oil, their melatonin levels, also the pineal gland produces the melatonin, the greatest antioxidant on earth. And when you take the oil, your melatonin levels go right through the roof. They go up thousands of times. And this melatonin travels to every cell in your body. So that has a great deal to do with the wonderful effects that this substance has on all diseases. And I've openly challenged the pharmaceutical industry for years. If you have any substance to treat any illness that is more effective than this oil, please show it to me. And I've spoke in medical schools here in Europe. I spoke in medical schools in North America. No one will get up and take me on. Doctors just sit there and stare at me. But the simple truth is, the doctors know very well that if this oil was available and we could all make our own and have a nice big jar of it in our own home, for medical needs, 9 out of 10 of these doctors would be out of work. Because, this oil is rejuvenating vital organs. There's no, if you have a severe wound, you just put the oil on it. You don't have to worry about infection. It's a natural anesthetic. It's a natural antibiotic. It's just endless what this medication can do. But there's so much financial interest. Now, with the doctors and the lawyers are all involved in it too. It's a wonderful racket. I'm going to go in now. Most of these lawyers smoke pot themselves, for God's sakes, and the judges too. But they'll take you in there and put you in jail because you do the same. How ridiculous is this?
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like telling your kids, don't smoke cigarettes while you're sitting there with a fag in your hand, so.
Same thing.
Same thing, yeah. But I was going to say that, talking about the legalisation of cannabis, you obviously got the people that argue against it because they say that if you make it legal, then every man and dog's going to be smoking it, and abusing it, and that sort of thing. But so what are your thoughts on that one, Rick? Is there actually any statistical evidence or truth to what they're saying?
No, there's not. I know many people that have smoked cannabis all their lives, and they're some of the most productive people in our society. It does no harm. And I believe, actually, I met a man last night from South Korea, and he's interested in putting my book out in Korean. And we were talking about North Korea, of all places. I guess the government in North Korea encouraged people to smoke cannabis and cigarettes because it's much healthier for them. And like I said, I've driven years ago. I bought a great big motorcycle in the 1980s, a V65 Magna Honda, 120 horsepower, beautiful bike. I still love that. I wish I still had it. But nothing will tell you more quickly than a motorcycle if you're impaired. And I'm ashamed to say it, but I was about 35 before I started smoking cannabis. And so when but like alcohol and big motorcycles do not mix. If you try to drink and drive, you're going to kill yourself. But with that oil, or not the oil, in those days, I was just smoking pot or eating a little bit of hash. But the problem is with me, I was like a maniac. When in the 70s, I had motocross, 250 Elsinores and 250 Husqvarna, dirt bikes. And I used to go tearing through the woods and all this craziness. So, I was pretty good with a motorcycle. But when I got that Magna, I drove it like an idiot. Even at 35, 36 years old, I everywhere I went, I was going 100 miles an hour. But when I started smoking the cannabis, and especially I used to make these little discs out of the hash, and I would just put it down, next between my lip and my teeth. Just put it down in your lip, and I'd get out there on the bike, and I'd be going 100 miles an hour, and then all of a sudden, about 45 minutes later, the bike would slow down, and I'd get this big smile on my face, and then I'd just cruise with the bike all day long. And I drove that bike tens of thousands of miles. I never had a ticket. I'd never had an accident. So how dare anybody try to tell me that I can't drive my vehicle while I am under the influence of this wonderful plant? It's ridiculous. Look at the pharmaceuticals out there. People driving around on OxyContin and Tylenol 3. I seen what Tylenol 3 did to my father. My dad, when he was 69, he hit one of his hips, or his hip went bad. Well, they put him into physiotherapy, and they, tortured him for 3 months. And then finally, some doctor looked at him and said, well, he needs a hip transplant. So they gave him the hip transplant. And then when Dad got out, I noticed, his driving. My father was an excellent driver all his life. And then all of a sudden, oh my God, on the highway, I was scared to go anywhere with him. And I didn't know what was happening. But, come to find out, Dad was taking anywhere from 12 to 16 Tylenol 3s a day. He was right out of it. It was just like he didn't even know where he was. So, but people, those are the people I worry about. I don't worry about meeting a cannabis smoker on the highway. But when you meet somebody that's full of pharmaceuticals, them I worry about.
Yeah. Some of them can mess you up pretty bad. They even the depression medication and that sort of thing. Very, very powerful. So, all right, what I was going to ask you as well, I know our viewers would love to know what you're up to at the moment and what's sort of got your attention at the moment. So do you mind just sort of telling us what's sort of happening on the Rick Simpson front right now?
Well, I was back in Canada, until just recently. I went back home for 11 months. It was so funny when I went back because not one cop came near me. Oh, no, excuse me. That's a lie. There was one police officer that came near me. He was looking for treatment for his daughter. But, the government there now, I think they realize that, I become the leader of the movement, and, this has spread so far now that if they took me into a court now, the courthouse would be surrounded, and it would cause, more focus on this information. So they just stay away from me now. But, I spent about 3 years in Europe, and I've come to love Europe. It's wonderful over here, the people, the different cultures, the different foods. And I found the European people to be much more open-minded. Here they use you with respect. And, it was a refreshing change to come from Canada. And the first country I went to was the Czech Republic. And I remember the second night I was there, I did this a lecture. And when I come down off the stage, they said, go in this room. So I opened the door and walked into the room, and here's a police officer standing there in uniform. And I looked and I thought, uh-oh, what's this? And the officer could speak English, so he introduced himself, and all of a sudden, he pulls a joint out. He's in uniform. He sparks it up, takes a couple puffs, and passes it to me. And I'm looking at him thinking, what is this? So I took a couple puffs, and I looked at him, and I said, what do the police here in the Czech Republic, think about these laws? And he said, well, Rick, he said, many of us smoke cannabis ourselves. And he said, we don't feel that we have the right to interfere with other people, who do the same. But he said, if you were growing large crops or something like that, or if you were dealing drugs, yes, then we would come after you. But he said, for the most part, we leave people alone. And I mean, what a refreshing change it was to talk to a police officer who spoke that way. But I see the walls coming down in Europe everywhere. They're making the oil in Poland. Switzerland just legalized. Romania just legalized. Slovenia, they're putting a big proposal before the government next month to legalize. It's just happening everywhere now. So it's just a matter, I think in the matter of the next few months, we're going to see this thing legal. And I believe that, and the same thing is going on in the U.S., although I know Mr. Obama doesn't like that. But I think in the next year and a half, every state in the union is going to be legal. And I wouldn't want to be Mr. Obama when that occurs, because I don't think the American people are going to be too pleased with that man.
I don't think they're very pleased with him at the moment anyway. So.
Right.
But I was going to ask you, Rick, on a lighter note, and I guess totally off subject, I'm interested to know what you like to do in your spare time. Do you have any hobbies, or, what does Rick Simpson do to unwind?
Unfortunately, brother, I have no spare time. What happens when I started doing this back in 2003, I really thought that where it was so simple, I thought there had to be many people doing the same. But it was about a year later when I realized that I was the only one doing it. But what happens is it takes over your life, and treating people and helping others. I think it's the greatest thing any of us can do. And I mean, I was growing the plants and making the medicine, and I was giving the medicine away for nothing. And, a lot of people have said, well, if you had it to do over again, what would you change? But in reality, I wouldn't change a thing. I would have done everything the same, and I have no regrets whatsoever for doing what I did, because I know in my heart that I did the right thing. And I wish I could say the same for our governments. So to me, there's no looking back. We are at the beginning of a new age, the age of enlightenment. And I think many people are going to wake up, and we're going to change this world, because if we don't, we're facing extinction. They're poisoning the planet, everything they're doing with their nuclear power and Gulf oil spills. And, our environment is becoming so toxic. And that's a good part. Well, on top of that, GMOs, genetic modification, that's another thing that should be outlawed. But the public is becoming so unhealthy today, and that is the main reason. But in the future, the only hope we have, and there's no possible way we can get away from using the cannabis plant, whether the governments like it or not, because there's simple things out there like the honeybee. The honeybee is going extinct. Now, if that happens, that's going to have a devastating effect on farm crops. Now, what plant grows which really does not need the honeybee? Well, that would be the cannabis plant. You know, the males and females, and then the males open their pollen sacs, and then the wind pollinates the females. So no bees are required. But, you know, at present, there's somewhere in around 20,000 children starving to death every day on this planet. If we grew cannabis freely, we could end starvation. We could supply our own energy needs instead of using nuclear power or you know, fossil fuels. No, these new processes, well, in the old way, like 1 acre of hemp used to produce about 500 gallons of ethanol. But today, with these new enzyme processes, they can produce as much as 1,800 gallons per acre. Now, an acre is not very big. So, you know, if you have 1,800 gallons of fuel, well, that's enough to heat your house, run your car, and you have a few hundred gallons left over. So we could become energy self-sufficient. We don't need these energy companies. And everything, you know, like there's so many of these industries we have today that are poisoning the planet. If we switch these industries over into earth-friendly hemp-based industries, now nobody has to lose their jobs. Everybody could still work at the same factory or whatever, but now they're producing, you know, materials or goods from hemp, and it's earth-friendly. So, I think it's insane for us not to be doing this.
No, exactly right. Exactly right. And I mean, talking before, you know, you're talking about the shift that's sort of happening in the world in regards to, I guess, the acceptance and legalization issue of marijuana in the US and so forth. I mean, it's incredibly powerful, and I guess it all started with you know, and what you've done and continue to do. But I mean, the fact is, each and every one of us can play our part as well in helping to get this amazing medicinal plant fully legalised and freely available, like you said, to every human being who wants it. So I'd just like to finish off, Rick, and just ask you, would you mind telling our readers and viewers how they can also help to make this a reality? What can they actually do?
Well, it's really all about standing together. Now, I mean, you know, the ordinary people, we think we have no power, but in reality, the people are the power. I mean, take Australia. You know, what would happen if everybody in Australia decided next weekend not to drive their cars? Do you think the oil companies might pay attention? You know, we have the power, but the trouble is we're like sheep. You know, we're so used to being told what to do, and we put our lives and our existence in the hands of these imbeciles, and look what they're doing to us. You know, if we want a future, we have to stand up for our own rights and create our own destiny, or create our own future. And if we do this, and you know, I'm not saying we don't need governments and people to represent us, but we have to get rid of the political parties because they breed nothing but corruption. We need independent people who will work for the public. And I think it's really time that we had like a world government. I'm not talking about the New World Order, not that variety, but if we had representatives from every region, you know, people that are known for their honesty and integrity, and everything was done with an open book policy, you know, to the public, I think we should take the money and resources that all these rich families like the Rothschilds, Rockefellers, I mean, they're criminals for God's sakes. They've robbed us. I mean, everything they have is the proceeds of crimes, and these are crimes that they committed against all of us. So take these resources and put them in the hands of people that will do the right thing for everyone on the planet. Help every country. And if that's done with an open book policy, then I think it would be a different world that we are living in.
It surely would be. Yeah, it surely would be. So, so just to finish off, Rick, before we go, thanks again for what you've spoken about and answering our questions. Been terrific. Been terrific. I've learned so much more, like different things you're talking about that I didn't know. But what I was just going to quickly ask you, a few weeks ago this is about you, but on your Facebook page, Janet put a post on you had a bit of minor surgery done. Now,
yes.
When that post went up, because I go on every day, I like to go on every day, there were a lot of comments from your followers asking how you were and is Rick okay, and there were a few silly comments, but just going to ask you, are you feeling okay? Is there
I'm feeling fine. Actually, I was in 2 days ago. I'm having the operation performed right here in Croatia, and I met the doctor the other day. Great guy. You see, when I was young, I had a vasectomy, so I couldn't have any more children. And sometimes people that have vasectomies, I mean, it was great for 30 some odd years, but then this little swelling started. And I looked into it, and I knew what it was. I mean, I knew it wasn't cancer. So it was funny the other day when we went to the doctor's office, he didn't know who I was. So, he started the examination, and he said, when he's seen, it's swollen up a bit, but I mean, I've been like this for over 6 years, and it doesn't really affect me that badly, but it makes you self-conscious. Because when you stand in front of an audience, it looks like you're kind of big down there, But I left. The doctor, he came over with the ultrasound, and he put the ultrasound on it, and you can see him looking. And I told him, I said, I wouldn't worry about cancer if I were you. And he started, and he said, and he kind of looked at me, he said, why do you say that? And I said, I really don't think there's much possibility that you will find cancer. I didn't explain myself. But when he did the ultrasound, he said, yes. He said, it's just fluid. He said, we drain it off. You'll go in the hospital for 3 days. The first day, they just prepare you. The second day, they do the operation. The third day, I'm out. And I can have the surgery performed here for about 6,500 kuna. That's the Croatian money. And that equals about 800 euro. If I had this operation done, like in the U.S., it would cost me $20,000 or 30. It's like I said, the money they charge is just so ridiculous. So over here in Europe, I have a lot more trust. Believe me, I don't trust any Canadian doctors. I wouldn't go near a Canadian doctor. But I have met some wonderful doctors here in Europe, and I am willing to put my trust in them.
Yeah, that's good, Rick. I'm glad everything's all right, because it was a bit like Chinese whispers, and everyone's putting their comment up, and yeah, it was getting silly. So no, that's nice to know.
I'm sure the government would like to see me dead, but unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's going to happen.
Not yet. So yeah, that's good, Rick. Look, thanks again for joining us today. It's been terrific, and before we go, we'd like to also encourage all of our viewers and readers to check out your website, phoenixtears.ca, and your Phoenix Tears Foundation. And if anyone's on Facebook, just everyone's on Facebook, then liking your Rick Simpson official Facebook page is an absolute must. If you want to stay up to date with everything that's happening on the medicinal marijuana front. And also, just quickly, there's a couple of things happening through your Rick Simpson Facebook page. Janet is working to try and get both of your books, the Rick Simpson story and Nature's Answer for Cancer, into hardcover. So there's, if everyone wants to go there, they can have a look and see how they can help out to try and get that to happen. And there's also a little girl by the name of Dahlia who her parents are trying to get her to Colorado, to Janet. And so people can go there and also see how they can help out with little Dahlia as well. So they're both on your Rick Simpson Facebook page. So Rick, thanks again, and I'd like to say all the best. Take care. Good luck with the surgery, and we'll speak to you again.
Well, Troy, it's been a pleasure, brother. And now you have my contact information, so anytime you'd like to do another interview, just get a hold of me, and we'll set it up, brother.
All right, no worries, Rick. Thanks very much for that. I really appreciate it. And I'm just going to... Okay.